I still remember the day she ran from our wedding, not because of the chaos it left behind, but because of the silence that followed. It wasn't the kind of silence that lives in empty rooms. It was heavier, like something alive, pressing against my chest until breathing itself felt like a confession. The rain had begun just minutes before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. Soft at first, then fierce enough to blur the white petals scattered across the path. I stood there in my suit, drenched in everything that was meant to be beautiful. Love, promises, forever, yet all I could taste was fear. People say time slows down when your world breaks, but that's a lie. It doesn't slow, it fractures. Every second turns sharp, cutting into you from different angles. I remember her father's eyes, confusion trying to hide shame, the whispers spreading like wildfire among the guests, a bride running away on her wedding day, a groom left holding the ring. I remember the priest looking down, pretending to pray, maybe for me, maybe for the mess we had both become. The musician stopped playing halfway through the melody. Even the violin sounded like it couldn't bear to go on. And I just stood there, still, waiting for someone to tell me it wasn't true, that she hadn't left, that any second she'd appear through the church doors, her dress catching the wind, her laughter cutting through the storm like light. But she didn't. She never did. Someone ran inside, her friend, I think. Her hands trembled as she whispered the words that shattered the air around me. She's gone. 2 syllables, and everything I thought I understood about love collapsed. Gone. Just like that. The girl I had loved for years. The one who knew every version of me. The one who had seen my worst and still chose to stay, had chosen not to anymore. I felt the ring in my hand grow heavier, as if mocking me. A small, shining circle meant to bind 2 souls together now sat cold and useless in my palm. The guests started to leave slowly, some out of pity, some out of discomfort, all carrying pieces of gossip they'd later turn into stories. I could feel their stares burn against my back, but I couldn't move. My legs refused to understand that the ceremony was over. Maybe I thought if I stood there long enough, she'd come back. Maybe I hoped she'd realize this was a mistake. But deep down I knew she hadn't run by accident. She'd made a choice, and that choice was to hurt me, to make me feel what she once felt when I broke her heart with another. I didn't chase her, not because I didn't want to. I did more than anything, but because some part of me believed I deserved it. The punishment, the emptiness, the humiliation. Once, years ago, she had found me with someone else. Not in the way people think, not betrayal of touch, but betrayal of memory. I had held on to a love that wasn't hers, a ghost I hadn't buried yet. She knew it, and maybe in her silence, she had already decided that one day she would make me pay for it. I just never thought it would be like this. In front of everyone, in front of the world, on the day we were supposed to become one. When the last person left and the rain finally softened, I walked outside. The sky had turned gray, the kind that doesn't promise thunder but leaves you cold anyway. Her bouquet lay by the gate, crushed and soaked, petals torn apart by the wind. I picked it up, not knowing why. Maybe because it was the last thing she touched before she ran. Maybe because holding it made me feel like I still had a part of her. But when I looked closer, I saw something strange. The ribbon around it wasn't the one I'd chosen. It was hers, a small blue one she always wore on her wrist. It felt like a message, one I couldn't yet read. For days, I searched for her, called her, wrote letters that came back unopened. Her apartment was empty, her phone switched off, her friends either silent or pretending not to know. She had vanished completely, like a chapter ripped out of a book mid-sentence. People told me to move on, to forget, to start over. But how do you forget a woman who made you believe love could heal and destroy at the same time? Every corner of that city whispered her name. Every sunset felt like her eyes closing on me. That night, when I finally took off my suit, the rain had stopped. The silence had not. And somewhere miles away, I knew she was out there, not lost, not broken, but running, because she wanted me to feel what it's like to lose something you thought was yours forever. A year is a strange thing. It can heal you or hollow you. Sometimes it does both. For me, It was a quiet punishment measured in sunrises that felt the same in nights that wouldn't end. After she ran, life didn't collapse all at once. It just started fading around the edges. Friends stopped calling. Work became routine. Laughter turned into habit. I kept living because stopping felt too dramatic. Yet every day I woke up wondering if she'd appear at my door. She never did. Seasons changed like background music. The world kept spinning. And I stayed exactly where she left me, somewhere between the past and the apology I never got to give. Then one morning, when the city smelled of rain again, I met someone. She wasn't a replacement, not even close. She was light where the other had been fire. Her name was Hera, a woman who carried calm in her eyes, as if the universe had forgotten to give her chaos. We met at a bookstore, both reaching for the same old poetry collection. She laughed first, that soft, effortless sound people make when they haven't been taught by pain yet. I remember thinking how unfair it was that someone like her could still believe in love, while I was standing there holding a heart full of ashes. But she didn't ask me to believe in anything. She just asked if I wanted coffee. And somehow, that's how it started, the slow rebuild of a man who thought he was done with feeling. Hera never asked about the woman before her. Maybe she sensed that some stories aren't meant to be touched until they're ready to bleed again. She spoke about small things, the smell of cinnamon, the comfort of silence, the way some people never really leave you even when they're gone. I used to listen quietly, afraid that if I spoke too much, she'd hear the ghost behind my words. But she stayed. Day after day, she stayed. She taught me that not every love has a burn. Some can just exist quietly, like candlelight that doesn't demand to be noticed yet still keeps you warm. Slowly, I began to breathe again. Months passed. The ache softened, not gone, just dull like an old scar. I started smiling without guilt, learning to hold joy without fear it would break. And when Hera told me she was pregnant, I didn't panic. I cried, honestly, helplessly, because for the first time in a long time, the future didn't look like an apology. It looked like a beginning. We married quietly. No guests, no music. Just two people signing papers and promising peace. The world outside the courthouse moved like it always did, indifferent and loud. But inside, everything felt still. I thought maybe, finally, the universe had forgiven me. But peace is rarely permanent for those who've known chaos. It was almost a year after the day she ran, exactly 365 days later, when the past found its way back. I was at the clinic with Hera, holding the first ultrasound picture in trembling hands, when my phone buzzed. A known number. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something about that vibration felt too familiar, too heavy. I stepped outside into the hallway, the smell of antiseptic and rain mixing into something hauntingly nostalgic. "Hello." My voice cracked. There was silence at first. Then, a breath. I knew that breath. You don't forget the sound of the person who once stole your air. "It took me a year," she said softly. "A whole year to find you." I froze. Her voice hadn't changed. It still carried that quiet storm, that weight of things unsaid. I didn't know what to say. My throat closed, words dying before they could escape. She continued. "I thought you'd wait." The irony in her tone hurt more than any scream could. I looked through the glass door into the room where Hera sat, smiling, holding her belly, unaware that the ghost of my past had just stepped back into my life. "I did," I whispered finally, "for a long time." A pause. Then she laughed, but it wasn't joy, it was disbelief. "And now, you found peace without me?" Her question felt like accusation, and heartbreak in one. I wanted to tell her everything, that I hadn't stopped loving her, that every night I still dreamed of her walking back through that church door, that Hera wasn't a replacement but a reason to survive. But how do you explain to someone that you moved on without meaning to? That healing doesn't ask for permission. It just happens quietly when pain gets tired of living inside you. So I said nothing. Silence became my answer. She sighed. "I wanted to punish you," she admitted. "I thought if I disappeared, you'd finally feel what I felt when you couldn't let go of her, the woman before me. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was punishing myself." Her words shattered something I didn't know was still whole. For a moment, I could see her again, not the bride who ran, not the ghost who haunted me, but the woman who once loved me enough to break me. I wanted to say I was sorry. I wanted to ask if she could forgive me. But fate is cruel. It doesn't wait for closure. "Hera?" she asked, almost whispering her name like a curse. "She's your wife now?" I closed my eyes, letting the truth fall heavy. "Yes," I said quietly. "And she's pregnant." There was no scream, no goodbye, just a faint sound of her breathing one last time before the line went dead. I stood there for a long while, holding my phone like a confession. Somewhere inside, guilt and relief began their endless war. For the first time, I realized love doesn't end when someone leaves. It just changes shape, waiting for the next storm to remind you it never really died. 3 days passed after that call, yet her voice kept replaying in my mind like a song stuck between verses. Every word, every pause, every breath felt carved into me. I didn't tell Hera. I told myself it was to protect her peace, but deep down, I knew I wasn't ready to confront the past again. Not while holding a future that was finally beginning to bloom. I tried to bury the thought, but the past has a way of finding its own roads. And it did, not through calls, not through dreams this time, but in flesh and shadow. It was a Sunday morning when I saw her again. The sky was clear, but something in the air felt heavy, like the world knew it was about to hold its breath. Hera was inside, humming softly while arranging the nursery. I was on the porch, trimming the small plants she loved so much. That's when I heard the sound of heels on the gravel road. Slow, steady, familiar. I turned, and there she was. A year's worth of absence stood right in front of me. She looked different, yet the same. Her hair was shorter now, her face a little thinner, her eyes carrying the kind of sadness you can't hide behind makeup. But she still had that presence, that quiet gravity that drew everything toward her. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. The air around us felt like glass, fragile, reflective, ready to shatter. "You really didn't think I'd find you," she said softly, her voice almost tender, almost cruel. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, the garden she once helped me build now between us like a barrier of forgotten promises. She took a step closer, and the faint scent of her perfume, the one I thought I'd erased, came rushing back, stirring every buried emotion I had worked so hard to silence. I wasn't hiding. I managed finally. "You disappeared." Her eyes flickered, pain flashing like lightning behind a storm cloud. "I ran," she said, "because staying felt like dying." I swallowed hard. "And now—" She looked at me then, not at the man I was, but the man I had become. Her gaze drifted the open window, where Hera's laughter floated through, light and unguarded. She smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now I see you found your cure," she said. Those words hurt more than anger would have. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she wasn't something to be cured from, that she was the wound that taught me how to feel it all. But instead, I said the only truth I could bear to say aloud. "You left me no choice." She nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I came, not to blame you. I just needed to see if you ever looked back." I didn't know what to say to that. I had looked back, every day, every night, in every dream where the rain still fell, and she still walked away. But what good was honesty when the truth could only hurt more? So I stood silent again, and in that silence, everything we hadn't said for a year began to speak. The apologies, the regrets, the moments we wish we could undo. They all filled the air between us, invisible but heavy. She took a deep breath. "You know," she said, her voice trembling, "the day I ran, I thought I was proving something. I thought if I left, you'd finally understand what it feels like to lose someone you love without warning. But I didn't know that in trying to hurt you, I'd destroy myself too." Her eyes glistened. "I went everywhere trying to forget you, new cities, new faces, new names. But nothing worked. You were everywhere, even in the places you never existed." Her words cut deeper than any blame could. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her one last time, to remind her that I never stopped caring. But then I saw Hera's reflection in the window. She was watching, her hands resting gently on her stomach. confusion clouding her face. In that instant, the present collided violently with the past. The woman who gave me peace and the woman who taught me pain both stood in the same frame of my life, and I didn't know which one I belonged anymore. Hera stepped outside slowly, her smile fading as she recognized the stranger standing before us. "Who is she?" she asked quietly. My throat tightened. I looked at the woman from my past, her eyes pleading, almost daring me to say her name, and then at Hera, who looked at me not with anger, but with a kind of fragile fear. The truth was simple. The explanation wasn't. "She's someone I used to love," I said finally, my voice cracking like dry wood. Hera didn't speak. She just nodded once, a small, graceful nod that somehow hurt more than tears would have. She turned and walked back inside, closing the door softly behind her. And just like that, the sound of her footsteps faded, leaving me once again standing between two worlds that could never coexist. The woman before me looked down, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "You're happy now," she whispered. "Don't let me ruin that." I shook my head. "You didn't ruin anything," I said. "You just reminded me what it cost to find peace." She smiled sadly. "Then maybe my punishment is complete." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of jasmine and rain. She turned to leave, and I didn't stop her this time. I just watched the same way I had a year ago, as she walked away, slower now, but just as final. And I realized something I should have known all along. Some people don't come back to stay. They come back to say goodbye properly. When she disappeared around the corner, I finally exhaled a long, trembling breath I've been holding for a year. The sky darkened above, and the first drop of rain landed on my hand. Soft, cold, familiar. It felt like closure, or maybe just the illusion of it. But for the first time, I didn't run from the pain. I let it wash over me. The rain had already started when I walked back inside. It was light at first, just a soft tapping on the windows, like the world was pretending not to cry. The air smelled of jasmine and confusion. Hera sat on the couch, her hands folded over her belly, her gaze fixed somewhere between the floor and the storm outside. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, alive, carrying all the words we didn't yet have the courage to say. I closed the door behind me, slowly, carefully, as if any sudden sound might shatter what little peace remained. "Hera," I whispered, but her name fell heavy on my tongue, like something I wasn't worthy of saying. She looked up at me, her eyes softer than I deserved. There wasn't anger there, not yet, just hurt, the kind that hides behind calmness, the kind that loves too much to explode. "Who was she really?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling but steady enough to hurt. I wanted to lie, not because I didn't respect her, but because I wanted to protect her from the truth, the messy, unhealed truth of who I used to be. But lies, I've learned, have a sound to them, and she'd hear it instantly. So I told her everything, not all at once, not like confession, but like bleeding, piece by piece. I told her about the woman who ran from our wedding, about the love that once burned so bright it left scars, about the silence that followed, and the punishment I thought I deserved. I told her I had tried to move on, not because I stopped loving, but because I didn't know how to keep drowning. When I finished, Hera didn't say a word. She just sat there, staring at the floor, as if trying to measure the space between forgiveness and betrayal. I waited for her to speak, to cry, to scream, but instead, she stood up, slowly, gracefully. "I don't hate you," she said softly. "I just don't know how to be in love with half of you." Those words hit harder than any accusation could. Half of me, that's what I'd become. One half buried in the past, the other trying to build a future. I wanted to tell her that I loved her wholly, that she wasn't a consolation, but a miracle. But she wasn't asking for reassurance. She was asking for honesty. I thought I was done with her. I whispered. I swear I did. Hera walked to the window and looked out at the rain. "Maybe you were," she said, "but sometimes the ghosts we bury have a way of breathing again when they smell love nearby." Her voice cracked at the end, and I felt something inside me collapse. I moved closer, slowly, afraid she'd step away. But she didn't. I placed my hand on her shoulder, and she didn't flinch. She just sighed, as if releasing a weight she'd been holding since the moment she saw us outside. "I'm not angry that she came," she said finally. "I'm angry that you still looked at her like she was part of you." I closed my eyes. She was right. I did look at her that way, because part of me still belonged to the version of myself that loved her, the man who waited in the rain, ring in hand, heart breaking quietly. But that man was gone. Or maybe he had just changed. I turned to Hira, my voice shaking. She was my past, I said, "But you're my peace." She turned to face me then, tears glistening in her eyes. "Peace doesn't come easy," she whispered, "and it doesn't survive secrets." For the first time since she'd walked in, I felt fear. Not the fear of losing her, but of watching her drift away slowly. The kind of loss you can't fight, because it happens in silence. She brushed past me gently, heading toward the bedroom. Before closing the door, she paused and said, "I need time, not to decide if I love you, I already do, but to decide if I can live with this part of you." The door clicked shut, and I was alone again. The sound of the rain grew louder, filling every corner of the house like an echo of regret. I sat down, running my fingers through my hair, the taste of guilt sharp in my throat. On the table beside me lay the ultrasound photo, the small heartbeat that was supposed to symbolize a new beginning. I picked it up, staring at it through blurred vision. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled, distant yet familiar. It reminded me of the night she ran. The chaos, the emptiness, the feeling of watching something slip away that you thought was yours forever. Only this time, it wasn't her leaving. It was me, watching my own choices undo the happiness I had finally built. I realized then that love isn't about choosing between past and present. It's about surviving both, without losing yourself in either. And as the storm raged outside, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just another beginning, the kind that hurts before it heals. Days blurred after that night, dissolving into a quiet routine that didn't feel like living, more like waiting. Hira spoke less, smiled less, and slept in another room now, not out of anger, but exhaustion. Love, I realized, doesn't always end in fire. Sometimes it fades in silence, like a candle that runs out of wax long before the flame dies. Every morning, I'd wake to the sound of rain tapping against a window, and for a moment, I'd pretend she was beside me again, the way she used to rest her head on my shoulder, whispering about baby names and nursery colors. But when I'd open my eyes, there was only emptiness, and the faint echo of promises I couldn't keep. I tried to fix things. I made breakfast she wouldn't eat, left notes she wouldn't read, stood at her door rehearsing apologies that sounded smaller every time I said them aloud. She never pushed me away, but she didn't let me in either, and I understood sometimes love needs distance to breathe again, but the distance was killing me. I'd look at her belly and feel a strange mix of awe and guilt. Awe, because there was life growing inside her, something pure and undeserving of all this chaos. Guilt, because I feared that life would arrive into a home where love had turned to ghosts. Then one evening, as twilight painted the world gold, I found her standing in the garden, the same garden where she had seen the woman from my past. She was watering the plants absent-mindedly, her face calm, but her eyes far away. "You shouldn't be out here," I said softly, walking closer. "It's cold." She didn't look at me. "You used to love the rain," she murmured. "I still do," I replied, "but only when it doesn't take something away." Her hands froze midair. She turned to me, her eyes wet but steady. "You can't blame the rain for what people do in it," she said quietly. And then she walked back inside, leaving me standing there under a sky that suddenly felt too heavy to hold. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories of her, the one who ran, came back uninvited. The way her dress had swayed in the wind, the way her voice trembled when she said my name, the way her eyes looked when she realized I'd built a new life without her. It wasn't longing anymore. It was something else, closure that never quite learned how to close. Sometime past midnight, my phone buzzed on the table. I hesitated before picking it up, fearing what name might flash across the screen. But it wasn't her name this time. It was an unknown number again. For a second, I thought it might be a wrong call. Then a message appeared. You never said goodbye properly. My chest tightened. I didn't need a name to know who it was. Only one person in my entire life could write something that simple and make it feel like a wound. I stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen, unsure whether to answer or delete it. But before I could decide, another one appeared. I'm leaving the city tomorrow. I just wanted to see you one last time, not to change anything, just to end it right this time. I read it again and again until the words began to blur. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect what little was left of my fragile peace. But another part, the weaker, older, honest part, knew I couldn't, because some stories don't end until you look them in the eye and tell them they're over. The next morning, Hera noticed a restlessness in me. She didn't ask why. Maybe she already knew. That's the thing about people who truly love you. They always know, even when you wish they didn't. Over breakfast, she finally spoke, her tone gentle but tired. If you need to see her go, she said, I won't stop you. Just remember who you're coming home to. Those words broke me more than any argument could have. There was no jealousy in them, no anger, just quiet surrender. She wasn't fighting to keep me anymore. She was trusting me to make a choice. And that kind of trust felt heavier than chains. So I went, not to chase love, not to relive what once was, but to finally bury it. The city looked different now, brighter, cleaner, almost like it had moved on too. I found her where it all began, the old cafe by the riverside. She sat by the window, hair tied loosely, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. When she saw me, she smiled, not the smile of a lover, but of someone who had finally made peace with the end. You came, she said softly. I had to, I replied. Some ghosts don't leave until you walk them out yourself. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about pain, forgiveness, and how time changes love but never really kills it. When she finally stood to leave, she said something that stayed with me long after she was gone. You don't owe me love anymore. Just remember me kindly. And then, for the first time in a year, she walked away without running. No storm, no drama, no unfinished words, just quiet finality. I stood by the river until sunset, the wind brushing against my face like the last trace of her memory. When I finally turned back toward home, the weight on my chest felt lighter, not gone but gentler, like grief that had finally learned how to breathe. When I came back that evening, the house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that isn't empty but expectant. Hera was in the living room, sitting by the window, the fading sunlight outlining her profile like something sacred. She didn't turn when I walked in. The clock ticked softly between us, measuring every unspoken word. For a moment, I just stood there, memorizing her, the curve of her shoulders, the faint swell of her belly, the tired grace in her stillness. I wanted to say I'm sorry, but the words felt too small for the weight they needed to carry. She finally broke the silence. Did you see her? I nodded. Yes. How was she? Peaceful, I said after a pause, like someone who finally learned how to stop running. Something flickered in her eyes. Not jealousy, not relief, but a soft ache only people who have loved deeply can understand. And you, she asked. I think I finally said goodbye. I whispered. The room held its breath. Then she nodded slowly, almost as if she had been waiting for those words all along. Good, she said. It's time you did. I sat across from her, my hands trembling slightly. You're angry, I said, half expecting the storm that hadn't come before. I was, she admitted, for a long time, but anger doesn't change anything. It just keeps you tied to the hurt. She looked down at her hands. I realize I can either spend the rest of my life punishing you, or I can try to heal with you. I don't know which one I'm strong enough for yet. Her honesty hit harder than any accusation could. I leaned forward, my voice breaking. I don't deserve that kind of grace, Hera. No one ever really does, she said quietly. We just try to be better when someone gives it to us. Outside, the wind began to rise, scattering leaves across the porch. The weather had a strange way of echoing our hearts, always changing, never still. I reached out, hesitated, then placed my hand gently over hers. To my surprise, she didn't pull away. Her fingers trembled beneath mine, but she didn't move. For a long while, we sat like that, two broken souls trying to remember how to fit together again. Then she asked the question I had feared most. Do you still love her? The truth sat heavy on my tongue. A part of me always will, I admit it, but it's not the kind of love that wants to stay anymore. It's the kind that teaches you why you need to go home. Her eyes glistened with quiet tears. And am I home? I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had stayed, who had chosen patience over pride, love over revenge. You always were, I said softly. I just lost my way. That night, for the first time in months, she let me hold her. It wasn't passionate or perfect. It was trembling, fragile, and filled with the kind of silence that only two people who've been through war can share. I felt her heartbeat beneath my hand, steady and strong, and I realized that maybe love isn't about never breaking. Maybe it's about finding someone who helps you rebuild every time you do. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the distance between us began to shrink. We started walking together again, sometimes through words, sometimes through silence. She began painting again. I'd sit beside her, reading, pretending not to watch the way her face softened when she lost herself in colors. Little by little, the house began to breathe again. One evening, as we were setting the table, she said something that stayed with me. I used to think love meant never doubting, never fearing. But now I think love is what you choose after the doubts and fears don't leave. I smiled faintly. Then maybe we're finally learning what real love is. She looked at me with that same calm, wounded tenderness. Maybe we are. Later that night, as she slept beside me, her head resting on my arm, I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She stirred half asleep and murmured, "Just don't make me regret it." The room filled with a quiet warmth. I lay awake long after she drifted back to sleep, tracing the curve of her hand in mine, feeling the small kicks of the child beneath her skin, a reminder that life, even after ruin, still insists on being born. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain again. This time, I didn't curse it. I let it wash over the glass, soft and rhythmic, like forgiveness itself. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel haunted by the past. The woman who had once run from me was gone, not from the world, but from the part of me that still looked for her. Hera was here, her presence anchoring me to something truer, something real. I realized then that love doesn't always begin with passion, or end in heartbreak. Sometimes it survives, quietly, imperfectly, beautifully, in the spaces between both. And as I lay there, listening to her steady breathing, I knew that no matter how far I had fallen, I had finally found my way home. Months passed like pages turning in a book we were too afraid to finish. The days grew slower, quieter, but softer too. Hera began to laugh again, not often, but enough to remind me that healing wasn't something that happened all at once. It came in small moments, the sound of her humming in the kitchen, the way her hand lingered on mine when we passed each other in the hallway, the way her eyes softened every time she felt the baby move. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of things we didn't need to say, because love had started speaking for us again. But even as life settled into something that almost felt like peace, guilt never fully left me. It lingered, a quiet shadow that followed me through the hum of ordinary days. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at her, wondering how she could still look at me without hatred. Other times, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, watching her sleep, afraid that one day she'd finally realize I wasn't worth forgiving. I had learned to live with those fears, the same way one learns to live with a scar, by accepting that some pain never really fades. It just stops bleeding. When the day finally came, the day our child decided to arrive, the sky was painted in shades of storm and sunrise. It was early morning, and the world felt hushed as if holding its breath for us. Hera's hands gripped mine in the hospital room, her face pale but fierce, her strength terrifying and beautiful all at once. I'd never seen her like that, raw, powerful, unbroken. As she brought our daughter into the world, I felt something inside me shift, a strange, overwhelming blend of terror and awe. When the first cry filled the air, it was like the sound of a promise being reborn. Hira's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from something larger than either of us could name. The nurse placed the baby in her arms, and for a moment, time stopped. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, but reality was softer, quieter. Our daughter's tiny hand curled around Hira's finger, and I knew this was forgiveness made flesh. "Look at her," Hira whispered, voice trembling. "She has your eyes." I leaned closer, my chest tightening. "No," I said softly, tracing the baby's cheek. "She has your calm." We both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from relief and exhaustion, the kind that tastes like mercy. For the first time in years, the weight I carried began to lift, replaced by something humbler, purer. Holding our daughter felt like holding a second chance. The days after her birth blurred into sleepless nights and gentle chaos. I learned how to hold her, how to soothe her cries, how to stay awake through dawns that came too quickly. Every time I watched Hira with her, the way she sang softly, her voice a lullaby of love and endurance, I felt a quiet ache inside me. This was the life I had almost destroyed. And yet, somehow it had survived. One evening, as I was rocking the baby to sleep, Hira stood by the doorway, watching us. Her hair was tied loosely, her eyes soft with exhaustion, and something else, tenderness. "You're good with her," she said. I smiled faintly. "She doesn't know what I've done yet." Hira walked closer, her hand resting on my shoulder. "She doesn't need to," she said. "She just needs you to be here now." That "now" lingered in my mind long after she left the room, because that was the truth. Redemption isn't a destination. It's a daily choice. Every diaper changed, every midnight feeding, every quiet whisper of love. They were small acts of rebuilding, the kind that no grand gesture could ever replace. As the weeks passed, Hira began painting again. This time, not the muted grays and blues of sorrow, but soft yellows and warm pinks. Our home began to look alive again. Laughter returned, cautious at first, then freer. The ghosts that had once haunted the corners seemed to fade, replaced by the scent of baby lotion and sunlight. Sometimes, late at night, when the baby was asleep and the house finally still, Hira and I would sit on the balcony, saying nothing. The air between us would hum with quiet understanding. We watched the stars and let the silence speak, not of what we lost, but of what we still had. One such night, she turned to me and said, "You know, I used to think forgiveness was a gift I gave you, but I think I gave it to myself too." I looked at her, the moonlight tracing the outline of her face, and I realized she was right. Forgiveness wasn't something she handed to me out of pity. It was something she chose for herself, to stop bleeding from a wound that no longer needed to stay open. "I don't know how to thank you," I said quietly. She smiled, eyes glistening. "Then don't. Just love us better." The baby stirred inside, letting out a tiny cry. Hira stood to go back in, but before she did, she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "You were lost once, but maybe you were meant to find your way back through her." And as I watched her disappear into the soft glow of the nursery, holding our child against her chest, I understood love doesn't erase the past. It redeems it, piece by piece, heartbeat by heartbeat. That night, I looked at the stars, the same ones that had watched me through every mistake, every heartbreak, every desperate prayer. For the first time in years, I didn't ask them for anything. I just whispered, "Thank you," because somehow against all odds, love had not only survived, it had been reborn. Years passed, softly, almost unnoticed, like the slow fading of a song you've loved for too long. The house that once echoed with silence now lived and breathed with laughter. The walls, once haunted by unspoken apologies, now carried the sound of little girls' footsteps. Quick, light, full of wonder. Our daughter, Alina, grew like sunlight through an open window, warm, curious, unafraid of the world. Every time she smiled, I saw redemption staring back at me, proof that love, when tended with patience, can grow even from broken soil. She had Hira's eyes, calm, steady, filled with quiet wisdom far beyond her years. And yet, There was a spark of mischief in her, something that reminded me of the man I used to be before life made me cautious. She'd run barefoot through the garden, her laughter chasing away every ghost that had ever lingered there. Sometimes I'd watch her from the porch and think, this is what healing looks like. It has a face, a name, and tiny hands that reach for you without judgment. Hera and I had learned to love in new ways. Ours wasn't the fiery, desperate love of youth anymore. It was slower now, deeper, grounded in forgiveness and quiet companionship. We still fought sometimes, still hurt each other in small ways, but the difference was we always found our way back. Love, I realized, isn't about never leaving. It's about always returning. One evening, years later, I found Hera sitting on the balcony, a cup of tea in her hands, her hair streaked with the faintest trace of silver. The sky above was painted in the same hues as the morning our daughter was born. Storm and gold. You remember that night? I asked, sitting beside her. She smiled faintly. I remember everything, she said, especially how terrified you looked when you held her for the first time. I thought I'd drop her, I admitted, laughing. You were shaking, she said softly. But you didn't. You never did. Her words hung between us, gentle and layered. She wasn't just talking about the baby. She was talking about us, about how, despite everything, we hadn't dropped each other. Not completely. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset melt into the horizon. The air smelled of jasmine and rain, a scent that always seemed to follow us, no matter how many years passed. And for a moment, the world felt still, balanced, whole. Later that night, after Alina had gone to bed, I went through an old box in the attic. Inside were traces of lives we lived. Photographs, letters, small fragments of moments that had once defined us. At the bottom, I found something I hadn't seen in years, an unopened envelope of my name written in familiar handwriting. Hers. For a long time, I just stared at it. I had thought I'd burned all her letters, the ones she left behind when she ran. But somehow, this one had survived, untouched, waiting. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was short, just a few lines. If you ever read this, I hope you found peace. I hope she forgave you. And if she did, hold her close, because love that survives hurt is rarer than anything else. Don't waste it. Don't lose it again. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. There was no ache this time, no old longing, only gratitude. She had been right. Love that survives hurt is rare. And somehow, against all odds, I had been given another chance to keep it. The next morning, I took the letter to the garden and buried it beneath the same tree where Hera had once seen her, the woman from my past. The soil was soft, damp with dew. As I pressed the earth over the paper, I whispered, "Thank you for running, for returning, for teaching me what to never do again." When I stood, Hera was at the doorway, watching me. She didn't ask what I was doing. She didn't need to. Some things don't need words. They just need time. That evening, we sat together with Alina between us, reading her favorite story. She kept interrupting, asking questions, laughing at parts that weren't funny, clapping her hands whenever something magical happened. Her joy was contagious, wild, innocent, untamed. And as I looked at them, my wife, my daughter, my two miracles, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. The past doesn't vanish when you heal. It lingers quietly, reshaped, teaching you how to hold the present more gently. When Alina finally fell asleep on Hera's lap, I whispered, "You ever think about how far we've come?" Hera smiled, brushing a strand of hair from our daughter's forehead. Sometimes, but mostly, I just think about how lucky we are that love didn't give up on us. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft, rhythmic, familiar. But this time, it didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like music. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close, and for a moment, everything, every mistake, every heartbreak, every silent night, felt worth it, because it had led us here, to this quiet evening, to this small home, to this imperfect, miraculous love that had learned to stay. And as the rain whispered against the glass, I closed my eyes and breathed in the peace I had once thought I'd never deserve. Maybe she had run from our wedding to punish me. Maybe fate had punished us both. But somewhere between the leaving and the forgiving, we found our way back. And that, I realized, was the truest kind of love there is.